A strange thing happened to me about 5 years ago. It's not something that I can explain, and it changed my life completely. And I want to share this with you today in hopes that if you have anything like this happen to you, you don't just ignore it because it could change your life as well. I was at home one night and my daughter had gone to bed. It was past midnight. My wife was asleep. I was downstairs on the couch watching some TV, and I heard a voice from the radio that said, "Call 911," and I thought, that's weird. The radio is telling me to call 911. I didn't call 911. I turned up the radio, and the same voice came on again and said, "Call 911." Then I noticed that the station that was playing music just stopped. There was this static on the radio like somebody was messing with it. Then the voice said it again, "Call 911." And so I went over to the radio and I turned it off. Then the voice said, "Turn the radio back on." So I turned the radio back on, and it was still just this static with this voice saying, "Call 911." I thought, this is really weird. And then I started thinking, who am I going to tell this story to? No one's going to believe me. So I did, and called 911. I kind of forgot about it and went back to watching my show. Then maybe about 10 minutes later, the same voice came on again and said, "Are you listening to me?" And I thought, how does the radio know I'm listening to it? How does it know that I heard it say call 911? So then the voice said it again. "Are you listening to me?" Shouted back at the radio. "Yes, I'm listening." Then the voice said, "Do what I told you to do." And I said, "What was that?" Then it said, "Call 911." And I thought, okay, now I definitely need to record this. So I got my phone and I started recording, and it said, "Call 911." I thought, why would I do that? Do I need to call 911? Maybe somebody robbed a bank or something, and I should be a good citizen. But then I thought, no, that's silly. If something happened, why would it tell me to call 911? It continued to say, "Call 911, call 911, call 911, and I kept telling it no. But it just kept repeating itself over and over again. I recorded it for a few minutes, and then it just kind of faded out into the static. And then it went back to playing music. And I remember thinking, wow, that was crazy. What was that? The next morning I woke up and I remembered that conversation, and I thought, oh my gosh, I gotta listen to that recording. So I listened to it, and it was exactly what I remembered. Showed it to my wife, and she thought it was very strange. She said, that is strange. Why would it tell you to call 911 and then repeat itself over and over again? We never figured that out. My wife said, well, if it tells you to do something, I think you should do it. Maybe it's trying to tell you something important. So I thought, well, okay, let's try it again. So that night I sat down and I waited. I turned the radio to that same station and I waited for it to start talking to me again, but it never did. I thought, weird, I wonder if it'll ever happen again. Well, I fell asleep waiting for it to talk to me again. A few weeks went by and it never happened again. I forgot all about it and moved on. Then one day I was driving in my car and the same thing happened. The radio said, call 911, and it repeated itself over and over again. And I thought, oh wow, it's happening again. And I pulled over and I turned off the radio and I got out of the car and I thought, this is crazy. The radio was talking to me. I sat back in my car and thought, should I call 911? Something going on that I don't know about? Should I look into this? But nothing happened. The radio just went back to playing music. I tried to figure out what station it was, but it wasn't any local stations. It was just some random station. And I thought, well, that's really weird. I drove off and I never gave it another thought. Well, a few days later, it happened again. I was in my truck and it said, call 911 over and over again. I thought, this is getting weird. And then I thought, you know what? Let's just do it. Let us just call 911. So I called 911, and I explained what was happening, and they thought it was very funny. They asked me if I was drunk, and I told them no. They asked if I was having some kind of mental breakdown, and I said no. I swear this is happening. The radio keeps telling me to call 911, and they thought it was pretty funny, and they just hung up on me. So I tried calling another 911 number, and the same thing happened. They thought it was funny. And then I thought, you know what? This is ridiculous. Nobody believes me, so I just kind of let it go. Well, about a month later, I was listening to the radio, and it started talking to me again. Call 911, and I thought, here we go again. But this time it also said, go to such and such a street. And I thought, what the heck? Is it telling me to go somewhere? So I wrote down the address, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to go see if anything's going on here. So I got in my truck and I drove to that address. And when I got there, I saw a house, and I thought, well, what am I going to do? Knock on the door? Ask if everything's okay? So I circled around the block and I thought, no, this is ridiculous. I'm not going to do that. But then I thought, you know what? I'm gone. Nah. Go back and nah. Gone nah. Knock on the door and see if everything's okay. So I went back to the house and I knocked on the door and a lady answered and I said, is everything okay? And she said, yeah. What's wrong? And I said, the radio told me to come here and ask if everything's okay. She thought I was crazy and closed the door. I thought, man, people are really nice around here. I got in my truck and I drove off. Well, I've never had that happen again. But every once in a while I'll hear something on the radio and I'll think, wow, it's trying to talk to me again. And I've never figured out what that was all about. If you ever experience anything like that, I suggest you pay attention because it could change your life. Or it could just be some glitch in the matrix. I don't know. But that's my story, and I'd love to hear yours.